Ladies and gentlemen, honourable members, it is my great pleasure to speak to you today to be a voice for colleagues across our nation. With the global pandemic still capitalising our time as school leaders, we remain in not just unprecedented times but unparalleled times as a profession. Whilst most other professions can do the job they have been trained for, my colleagues and I are working against the backdrop of a lack of professional agency, autonomy and independence. Instead of being hailed as heroes for working on the front line in recent times, keeping education going for our children and communities, even with last-minute updates and guidance on a Sunday night at 8 p.m, when we think we can finally rest easy for the evening, or having started back in January 2021 for a new term, only to be told that evening that we were once again to shut our gates and move online, we are heralded as incompetent, inconsistent and inept. Fixing the leadership crisis, time for change, could not have come at a more apt time. The NAHT continues to work tirelessly with school leaders for fairer pay, better working conditions, specifically in terms of workload, and for the health and well-being of its members. The following may be my personal experience, yet it also reflects countless colleagues who do not have the opportunity to address you as I do today. Therefore, I often use the pronoun we throughout to give power to those who could not be here today. Up until recently, I would have confidently called myself an aspiring head, one who wanted to make a difference more widely for the benefit of pupils, staff and the wider community, to take on that role of responsibility and accountability in leadership. However, in this regard, I now have to reflect. A decade-long real terms pay freeze, along with head teachers becoming scapegoats for government failures during the pandemic, has meant that school leaders are thinking twice about progressing all the way to headship, never mind staying in the profession at all, not least because when all is said and done, it is their head on the line, no pun intended. Over 80% of respondents told us that the pay freeze has negatively impacted their morale, no wonder. It is not exactly a fair day's pay for a fair day's work, when leaders are working around the clock, not the assumed media impression of 9 to 3 with 13 weeks holiday. It is time that our profession was given back the credibility it deserves in line with other countries who have education on a pedestal. It is time that we were paid in line with inflation year on year to reflect the continued and sustained hard work of our profession. It is time that we are remunerated for our tireless efforts in keeping education going for the last 2 years, despite several lockdowns, late guidance and the strain of doing our own track and trace. Who knew that we would need to train as public health professionals? It is certainly not what we were trained to do. More than half of those in assistant head or deputy head positions do not aspire to headship. I am both of those and I am currently on the fence. I will tell you why. Throughout the pandemic, vocational commitment has been tested to breaking point. Workload has soared to the point that our leaders are suffering with their own physical and mental well-being, more of whom have had to seek wider support, and there is no shame in that. Whilst we are trained to be educationalists, teachers at the core, we have fast become skilled in so many hats. Not only have we led our schools day in and day out with often vague guidance to say the least, yet we have also been our own healthcare professionals, social workers, nurses or doctors, counsellors, confidants, spiritual guides or advisors, computing technicians and so much more. Our profession is indeed a vocation. We are here because we want to be, because we have an innate desire to make a difference to the children, staff and communities we serve. One of the biggest stresses is that of an impending Ofsted inspection, with 23% of school leaders identifying external pressures as the top source of increased workload in our report. The negative high-stakes inspection continues to have a harmful effect on leadership aspiration. More than this, 60% of assistants and deputies identified Ofsted as the third top 5 deterrents to those aspiring to leadership or headship roles, behind concerns about taking sole responsibility for a school, 69%, and concerns about personal well-being, 87%. Personal well-being tops the list. Think about that for a moment. I wonder what self-care you afforded yourself this morning before you left to come here. I'm not talking about the basics of personal hygiene, but care. C-A-R-E, compassion, affirmations, reflection or reading and exercise. Did you care for yourself this morning? Do you care for yourself daily? School leaders are telling us in the thousands that personal well-being is all but bottom of the list, considering their professional to-do list. Whilst the Department for Education's the Education Staff Wellbeing Charter states that we do not require schools or colleges to prepare for inspection, That is precisely what schools do. The notion that a prudent head and leadership team would not undertake some preparation is ludicrous, particularly since inspection is a set of moving goalposts. It is inescapable. All colleagues want to do is put their best foot forward, and so they should, but this requires work, a lot of work. Hours and hours, days and days of preparation, staff professional development and paperwork. All this, and once inspected, almost half of all colleagues surveyed said it offered no useful insight. When will government take note and work collaboratively with the profession to bring back professional agency, autonomy and independence? What is being done by government to address workload in the short term during these challenging times, but also in the longer term to reduce high stakes accountability and professional burnout? Indeed, the greatest barrier to school leaders working more flexibly is workload. If this was addressed, then leadership might be more attractive to our middle leaders coming through the ranks. The DFE Charter does not go far enough in securing health outcomes or in the detail of exactly what workload will be reduced. The Charter states, well-being can therefore be described as a state of total health that is not merely the absence of disease or illness. Let me tell you, the greatest threat to well-being in our profession is exactly that, dis-ease. There is an undercurrent of dis-ease in having to juggle balls, spin plates and miraculously walk the tightrope, all whilst being on the strings of puppeteers who do not know their audience. Far from being the greatest showman or woman, head teachers and school leaders are fast becoming the outcasts of the profession through no fault of their own. Well-being should be the absence of dis-ease entirely, not just the absence of disease and illness. Every stage of leadership is affected by a widespread mental health and wellbeing crisis, and this after the introduction of the Charter in May 2021. How can school leaders possibly be expected to perform at their optimum when the odds are against them before they have even left the house? Not only do they have the care of their pupils, staff and communities to consider, they also have their own families and self-care to consider so that they remain able to serve and serve well. Our report, however, demonstrates staggering percentages for the impact on sleep, mental and physical health and feelings of worry, fear and stress. Who is accountable for this? Who is accountable for a sea of leaders whose well-being has suffered as a direct result of their work and workload? Who will look after us? I will give you an example of a typical day in recent times in brief. The alarm goes off at 6 a.m. Before 7:15, staff in WhatsApp groups are already going 10 to the dozen with messages of who is in, who is out, and how, as an SLT, we can cover absences in the absence of supply teachers. The hokey-cokey springs to mind. The day then begins with ensuring one knows the most up-to-date guidance and procedures, checking the number of COVID cases and seeing whether a phone call to public health is needed. This amongst staff needing to see you either for professional or personal reasons, checking said cover for classes, being out on the gate, appeasing tricky parents, preparing relevant documents for predicted Ofsted inspection, keeping on top of daily and weekly administrative tasks, hopefully trying to find time for teaching, learning and the curriculum, trying to remember to drink water, go to the toilet and eat, which may only be a possibility. The day does not end there. After hours, there are meetings, staff meetings, senior leader meetings, governor meetings and board meetings, not to mention the everyday tasks of cooking, cleaning and running a household, reading, playing or spending time with dependents, spending time with pets and trying to fit in some me time. Remember that self-care we mentioned earlier? What self-care? As school leaders, we have a vast amount of training, experience, expertise and skills behind us. You would not know that when we continue to be often rubbished by the media or swept aside by government, thinking they know best for a profession they do not have practice in. It is a huge responsibility to lead a school, even more so to lead a country. It is not government intervention we need, rather the right resources, autonomy and professional trust to do the job for which we were trained to do. Due propriety needs to be given to the profession so that government can collaborate with us in a meaningful way. We should not be the poor relative of frontline services. If the government were punctilious in engaging with school leaders, then we would not have to worry about crossing the T's and dotting the I's. And yet we find ourselves doing just that time and again, because often communication is rushed and not always thoughtfully considered, leaving us to research the meaning and due process it will require on the ground. Well-being is crucial to a profession that is on its knees whilst showing magnanimous and heartfelt strength in continuing to provide a first-rate education. Educating tomorrow's future is paramount in securing the society we want to see and the society we want to be. In order to do this, education professionals, head teachers and school leaders must have trust restored so that we can feel empowered to make decisions that best meet the needs of our learners, free from dis-ease, diktat or dictatorship.